This entire CheesyBay rabbit hole, strangely enough, begins on Reddit with a post from a user on a throwaway account. This is a rather long post, so we're going to read snippets of it. Question: why would there be 30-ish Wi-Fi networks seemingly emanating from under a concrete pad? Hi, for the record, this is a serious post, so please no tinfoil hat comments, etc. Recently, I lived on a semi-urban farm property for a few months, and I noticed some very unusual things that I won't get into here. What I'd like to know is what reason there might be for somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 low-strength Wi-Fi networks, all with exactly the same signal strength, peaking at the same point location, to be seemingly emanating from underneath a concrete pad, which is supposed to be simply covering gravel and dirt. To clarify, I used Wi-Fi Analyzer to ensure that it wasn't just a coincidental situation where lots of neighborhood networks happen to have similar signal strength due to the distances they were from their sources. I walked in concentric circles with Wi-Fi Analyzer running, and the further I got from the point location on the concrete pad mentioned above, the weaker the signals became. What OP gets into here is a very strange finding at his workplace. It was a massive concrete pad that he thought was just covering gravel and dirt, but in reality was hiding some sort of electrical system and Wi-Fi system beneath its surface. But what OP did not know that day is what he thought was simply a random Reddit post clarifying that he wasn't going crazy and that this was weird, was actually going to possibly even change the world, as it is a link to the deepest and darkest rabbit hole there is. On that day in April of 2016, OP would make this exact post to 3 separate subreddits, and they wouldn't get much attention on the other 2, but it was r/blackops where people would start wondering what was going on because they also realized this was very weird. People began asking OP for evidence of his claims, and so he began, unlike basically everyone on the internet, actually posting the evidence of what he was saying was happening, including pictures of him drilling into this concrete pad, as well as pictures he'd taken over his time working on this farm. Now, for context, OP is discussing an urban farm in Hawaii on the island of Oahu. That is something we don't learn in this initial post, but as this conversation began spreading across platforms to 4chan, Steam It, and Vote, basically all the platforms where these sorts of conversations were being had back then, users became progressively more concerned and intrigued by what OP was saying. As OP continues to tell his story, we learn that this concrete pad, which was, like he said, meant to just cover up dirt and gravel, actually had a little bit of a strange slope to it. In the center, it was 7 inches thick, roughly, and towards the outside, it got as slim as 4 inches thick. And OP confirms this when he shows us pictures of him drilling into the concrete pad. And to confirm this was genuine and OP had actually been to the place he was discussing, and this wasn't just his backyard, he began posting some of the pictures he had taken while working at the property, and it made it very clear when compared to satellite imagery that OP really had worked there, making users further trusting of OP's claims. We can see that OP had pictures of the buildings in the distance, a close-up of a power meter, power lines, the concrete pad, like we've discussed, a picture of him with his dogs hanging out of his flip-flops, and 2 very important pictures showing the backside of one of the shops on the property, displaying some materials that OP said were out of place. And needless to say, this all gave a lot more credence to what OP was saying. But for context, why OP is even here was still yet to be answered, and so someone asked, and OP said that he had been there on this farm as part of the distillation process, helping to get a distillery for local vodka up and moving on the island. Which is why OP points out this one image, which shows a blue bucket on the ground. The bucket, OP states, and later research proves, is not typical to the vodka distillation process. These are typically metal and/or wooden, making this plastic bucket a little bit out of place. Indeed, plastic is used very seldom in the distillation process, so it's from this blue bucket that OP is going to make possibly his first claim that is going to sound crazy to everyone then and now, but OP says this bucket, he believes, is being used to dissolve organic matter, we'll call it, and that these chunks of organic matter in this bucket are leftovers along with the liquid from the decomposition of humans. Now, whoa there, Cooper. Don't get too far ahead of yourself there, Pipsqueak. What are you talking about? How did we go from sus farm with a concrete pad and Wi-Fi signals to melting down the deceased? That seems like a hop, skip, and a leap too far, which I actually agree with and is why I didn't take this story seriously for months and really years since I first heard of it. And yet we are here, and I do firmly believe that something very strange happened on that property in Hawaii and really everything else connected to this whole rabbit hole. So hold on, because the concrete pad has a little more lore to it. In the essay that OP wrote on Reddit, he discusses how the signals beneath it are shifting as though trying to avoid someone finding what is hidden on the network there. And this pairs nicely with the next detail that OP gives across these new threads. He says that his boss has an eBay profile that he had told him about and had made jokes about, and it's named CheesyBay. So I suppose at least we know where the weird and gross in context term for this video came from. But beyond a weird name, what's up with the profile itself? Admittedly, all we have now are screen grabs, which are older than most of Gen A, and a janky Wayback Machine capture of the profile. But there is nonetheless a lot to notice. If it's true that this is OP's boss, then he is a very highly reviewed and regarded individual on eBay, and the people buying his products absolutely love his work. And the clientele Mr. CheesyBay keeps is quite unique. They seem to have a series of strange names, and the reviews they leave hint at something more, with a lot of A++++s being seen everywhere. It's a bit odd for sure, but not so much as the reviews in 2016 that people were able to capture before the CheesyBay user made them hidden. They discussed how wonderful the items that this user was selling were, and especially how wonderful what they contained was. And very strangely, a theme of children kept returning in these reviews, and how the contents were so good and genuine, and this wasn't just another fake. And I think it's worth mentioning that there's really no product where that sounds okay to be leaving a review of, but in context of what CheesyBay was selling, it's downright disturbing, because his eBay platform was dedicated to selling hard drives, but not just any hard drives though, broken and faulty hard drives. And so we now have weird reviews referencing children and suggestive language being left on an account owned by a guy who sells used and faulty hard drives online and had some 30 odd Wi-Fi signals emanating from a concrete pad on his industrial farm on an island. I don't like that. What's more, we already know these hard drives were faulty and or broken, but the other detail that brings this together is that despite being in poor condition, they were still selling for hundreds of dollars. Indeed, some of these even attracted bidding wars. And so the understanding grew across all these threads where researchers were now investigating, and OP was discussing that CheesyBay, OP's boss, was engaged, sure, in vodka distillation as a front, but was really in the business of selling cheese pizza. The very well-known euphemism for child things, hence the name CheesyBay. Many people started connecting. And quickly, so I don't yap too much, if I were to just think about the name CheesyBay, we have the obvious implication of what cheese is in these circles, and the idea of a bay, a safe place for a ship and its crew to find rest. In other words, somewhere to go undetected. Names are almost never random, so if that's all true what OP's telling us, one would need to know where this is happening, which is when we dive back into what specifically OP is now discussing with others on these platforms. He notifies us in his first post, or at least hints at the idea of there being a larger structure beneath the concrete pad, because the water he had poured down into the center had drained out and the routers were left unharmed. But it goes even further in the other threads. When asked if he has seen any underground structures that perhaps could be facilitating the activities believed to be on these drives, OP gives some interesting answers. Firstly, OP discusses how he didn't have time to fully explore this thing because he had to flee and get out of there due to the impending realization that this wasn't just a vodka distillery and that something else was happening. In those last weeks though, when he was collecting the evidence and taking these images, he had heard stories from locals and other employees and had made discoveries. Firstly, he was told that there was a contractor who had come in and leveled the land where the previous building stood from the farm and the previous owner. This also included removing massive underground vats from the farming process. And based on old Google Earth imagery, we do know that he's not lying about there having been a farm there previously. And you can see over time it gets run down to the point there are tiles missing from the roof and the plants start overgrowing the area. So it seems like it might have just been flat out abandoned. So the idea of underground storage tanks is no surprise. It's possible they held water for irrigation, which is a pretty common practice. Once the big vats were removed, however, no one ever actually saw the contractors fill them back in or put something else down there. They sort of just covered up the top with a layer of concrete and then eventually a new building. And so OP presumed that they were still there, these massive empty rooms beneath the ground. In addition to the new building placed over the former vats, other new structures were developed, some of which OP thought might have held entrances and exits to the underground area, as well as possible ventilation shafts. He then, after being prompted by curious readers, discusses an event he thought was weird at the time, but hadn't connected until recently. A user asked him if he had ever seen any tunnels. OP said no, not beyond anything used in the industrial process, but there was a sewage line that ran one side of the breadth of the property. It was a county municipal sewer line, and during his 6-ish month tenure there, OP has seen that line dug up, which was typical size, too small even for someone to crawl through, and then he saw it replaced by something on the opposite side of the area, closer where the vats were, supposedly a sewer line, but it was about the size of a door. It was enough for a full-grown man to easily traverse. And its location was that, like we said, within range of these vats and these old underground systems that had yet to be filled in. And since the original sewer line was kept on the property, just moved to the opposite side, OP thought this new one might have been a tunnel rather than just a sewer system. At this point, it's worth interjecting that the idea of underground operations is on everyone's minds in these threads, because there's pretty solid evidence that something very wrong is going on here. What's weird too is that the satellite imagery from that time does confirm the story so far. We can see from 2001 to 2014 a farm slowly decay as the roof on one of the buildings falls apart and the structures become overgrown. And then bam, late 2014 happens and someone comes in and plows most of the area and buildings, and in 2015 someone begins building a distillery. It matches exactly the same timeline from OP to the best we can ascertain. And that new owner, property records confirm, is OP's boss. But how do we know it's OP's boss? Well, because OP actually tells us, and thankfully because it allows us to investigate this story much further and confirm what his findings are. OP's boss's name, and this is public record covering my butt, OP's boss's name is David Flintstone. That is as far as we can tell his actual name, although I have some doubts on that, but that's neither here nor there. He also goes by David Flintstone, David Stone, and Biff Skipman. He's also a known criminal, so his info is out there, but I'm getting ahead of myself. David is a pretty bad guy, but thankfully his name stands out really anywhere, as he's named after a cartoon, but especially so in Hawaii. In tracing the records for permitting it and property ownership via the Hawaii government website on the matter, we can pretty quickly see some things are off. A researcher originally caught this way back in 2016. Searching through the records, he found that David Flintstone chose a man named Richard Lowther to be his new electrical contractor in developing these new areas on his property. Why David did this is unknown. It was a little bit of a weird move because it made his project take longer and he had to get permission and the paperwork to go through before he could actually start development. And obviously, there is something more to it, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it. Richard Lowther's name also pops up in another place, on a website that leaked the list of a bunch of members of a very disturbing cult that operates on the island of Hawaii, known as the Science of Identity Foundation. It is a yoga, Hindu, Buddhist mixture cult. There's a lot of things going on there with some Westernism mixed in there. Very, very weird. The Science Identity Foundation has managed to stay pretty much out of the limelight for the most part, but if you are a native Hawaiian, you for sure know how to spot a member because they just have that vibe. The founder's name is Chris Butler, and he started the cult in the 1970s. However, he adopted the name Jagat Guru Siddhaswarupananda. I'm not kidding. He really hasn't been seen by anyone outside of his cult followers in decades. Indeed, most to nearly all the material online about him depicts him in this weird 1980s, 1990s setting, and most of the content posted across the cult's platforms, which have a pretty sizable following, are merely clips from teachings he gave in the last millennium. The whole thing is super bizarre and uncanny, really. And two of my favorite details is that Chris Butler believes he is the reincarnated spirit of previous Chris Butlers, so he's actually around 5,000 years old. And two is that he wrapped an entire room of his compound, emphasize compound, in aluminum foil in order to keep germs out. And it's an eyesore, neighbors say. but most importantly, and why I bring this whole thing up and Chris Butler, is because his cult has a member who did the electric work for David Flintstone's suspicious farm and possible CP manufacturing facility. That seems like a very weird connection that we can't ignore. Of all people, you choose to wait weeks, maybe even months, to switch contractors to a known cult member. There is something that doesn't sit right about that with me. But what else is important to know is that Chris Butler and his cult have a lust for political power. See where this might be going? I didn't either. Keeping in mind political power and the believed activities on this distillery, Chris's lust for power was very well known, and for a long time he tried getting someone in the cult into politics. And lo and behold, he actually had succeeded with just that. His candidate of choice is none other than Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat politician from Hawaii. She became famous for some of her more based takes and going on shows like Joe Rogan in the late 2010s and early 2020s. And she seemed like a fairly moderate politician for our day and age. We are all aware that she lost her presidential election bid, and honestly, I forgot she had existed. Until making this video, when I realized the same cult who did work for the Island Distillery is the same cult that Tulsi Gabbard, her husband, and her dad were high-ranking members of. Tulsi denies this connection and having ever been a member of the cult, and even denies having participated in their activities, but other members have since come out and said undoubtedly that she was. And there's also a picture of Tulsi Gabbard at a cult retreat paying homage to an altar or shrine for Chris Butler, the cult's founder and leader, whom the cult worships as essentially God. So her whole denying of being involved in it is just a lie. But what isn't a lie is that this cult has connections to CheesyBay and political intrigue. They might seem distant, but I think we're going to start closing the gap more and more. This cult has also infiltrated the highest offices of American politics and power. Sound familiar? Tulsi Gabbard is literally in the same room as the president on a frequent basis and is part of his cabinet. The president being my bad. Continuing, her position is director of the National Intelligence Council, the Homeland Security Council, and really anything to do with intelligence programs in the US. This includes spying, blackmailing, double emphasize blackmailing, and black budget operations. Now, where can I think of someone with strange connections to child engaged activity? This is starting to sound weirdly familiar, and most strikingly, it means that she is the head of the US intelligence community as a whole. That would mean the CIA, FBI, NSA, DIA, and the other dozen or so agencies that are involved in the intelligence realm. Yes, a cult member, whose members also connect to the CheesyBay situation, is now one of the most powerful and well-connected people on Earth, with technology that allows her and her employees to listen to anybody at any time. So Chris Butler's plan definitely succeeded, to say the least, in infiltrating American politics. Also, she literally attended one of the cult's boarding schools. She made a point of promoting Americans buying from non-chain stores, which I firmly agree with, but suggested one in particular named Down to Earth, and Down to Earth is highly speculated to be owned by the cult she grew up in. The cult members worship their leader, like I said, as though he's a deity, and are completely subservient to his will. She even included a blessing in her wedding program for her second wedding from this cult leader, which is on screen now. So no, she can't deny being a part of the cult. And now, do I know what this all means in relation to the cult and its hold on power and the CheesyBay situation? No, but I think there's got to be more to it, and it's just such a wild link that I couldn't overlook it. Because at the very least, it does connect CheesyBay to the highest tier of American politicians, quite precisely to the president's cabinet and the national intelligence programs. Let that sink in. So coming back down, this cult is now directly, via electrical contracting work, connecting itself to the Cheesy property. And the electrical work would have been pretty substantial considering all the new buildings that were built and the Wi-Fi router array hidden underground and the possible underground structures along with it. And we know that David Flintstone went through the effort of hiring this cult member to do all of this new work. But that wasn't enough for me. I craved more data, not just some dude online yapping. Although admittedly he did give us a lot to go on, so I'm not saying it's not valuable, but we always like to double and triple check the evidence. And so I turned to some old research, one of which was a screenshot saved and passed down through the years of the permitting for the CheesyBay property via the Hawaii government website. It's where we learned of the contractor who's a member of the cult that now controls a person in charge of all national intelligence programs, but quit yapping, right? but it's also where we learn of something else. And as far as I'm aware, no one has ever reported on this. So as the kids say, this is new tea. Sifting through the tabs in the Hawaii Gov permitting website, I stumbled upon a section dedicated to permit violations related to the property in question that David owns, and found that, lo and behold, there are a few of them. 3 of these violations are old and or not related, but one of them is something different. It's from 2015, right around the time OP was working in the distillery there, if not just a slight bit before. And it says that the property was reported for a violation. The violation was, get this, building without a permit. Now, I don't think the government should be able to tell you what you can or cannot do on your own land. However, in this instance, it paid off because David, who he speculated as being up to no good and possibly even making trouble in the neighborhood, and who OP claims had possibly even been developing underground structures, had literally been building new buildings over top his land without permit. The specific line from the file is unauthorized construction going on the site, but construction with no permit on site. See attachment and documents tab. Funny enough, said documents are missing. There is no docs tab, but with what we have, we do know enough to ask, what on earth could David have possibly been building without a permit? After all, he clearly had no problem filing them, nor waiting, because he did so and waited the however long a period it might have been for approval just to change his electrical contractor to a member of the Chris Butler cult. So why then not just do it here? File the permit and save yourself the hassle, because risking a violation could mean further trouble in the future and possible inspections. So it would have had to have been something worth covering up and risking the chance of being caught red-handed and handed a violation. And I can think of numerous things rumored to be transpiring at the property that David Flintstone would not have wanted to be seen by the public. The source of the material garnering such high praise on eBay and the answer to what is really going on those drives is just one of the many possibilities. And to that point, another new thing these documents reveal is that another tenant is listed on the property in that same time frame along with David Stone, and his name is Jason Shitanashi. That is definitely not how you say that. Who is actually a Hawaiian government employee, and I kid you not, was just recently convicted of misappropriating COVID farmer relief money and taking kickbacks. This article dropped April of 2026, so the path of corruption is made self-evident by the actions of those connected to this strange, quote, distillery, as heavily air quote as possible there. And this all really does make one wonder what precisely they were building and why they didn't want it to be seen, and why a government employee is listed on this property who has a known history of corruption. That is not the only important thing in these property records. The tenants are David Flintstone and this Jason fellow, but the actual landowner is something named the Bishop Trust, which as it turns out is one of the wealthiest nonprofits in the world. Its assets are well over $10 billion, and it was begun by Bernice Pahui Bishop, a member of the Hawaiian royal family. The trust was substantial when it began and was primarily established to fund 2 schools in Hawaii, one for girls and one for boys. Yes, that would be a trust believed to be involved in cheese-related activities that now has connections to schools and kids all over the island of Hawaii. Just gonna put that out there as I continue. However, what has made this trust so valuable is that the Bishop family was one of the largest landowning families in all of Hawaii, and as the nation of America grew, so did the value of said lands and the trust itself. Millions turned to hundreds of millions, and eventually billions. Fun fact, the Bishop Trust has a roughly 10% stake in Goldman Sachs, one of the largest financial institutions on earth that was involved in helping Epstein funnel money for his purposes. So just a little crossover there. Unsurprisingly, the corruption grew as well in kind. And today, the Bishop Trust is so massive, it's almost untouchable. It is a powerhouse on the island of Hawaii, and very few oppose it. And it has become a place rife with evil doing. From double dipping in land deals to pockets getting extremely heavy, and $241 million in losses reported in just 3 years. All while everyone in charge got richer and richer. It's disgusting, and fun fact, the trustees even tried to use money to invest in a company at one point, so they have precedent for what we are discussing. It's very sad, to say the least. But digressing, as such, the fact that they own the land tied to CheesyBay should be raising some alarms, but it doesn't stop there. Keeping all this collusion and conniving in mind, one must recall that name David Flintstone, who I don't think has gotten enough attention, considering how deeply involved he is, being the main tenant on this land, operating what is believed to be a cheese pizza manufacturing facility. And to add credence to that idea, he accidentally revealed his true colors in just the past couple of years. In Medellin, Colombia, a man named David Flintstone was arrested for bribing a 15-year-old girl for actions of a certain kind. He gave her 1 million Colombian pesos, which is like 260 bucks, for her to come to his apartment he rented where he was going to her. Colombian news reported this David Flintstone they had arrested as being a wealthy American real estate man from Hawaii who had sold multiple millions of property and had made his way to Colombia to do these things with children, likely thinking it would go unnoticed and be easier than in America. Thankfully it didn't, and he was arrested and videoed, making it pretty obvious it's the same guy involved in CheesyBay and the production and selling of this child material. And yet the story gets deeper. This David fellow was arrested alongside someone else, and the both of them would end up escaping prison together. The authorities in Medellin say it was via a hole in the prison wall, but it seems highly probable it was a hole in some pockets that were filled with cash. In other words, that they bribed their way out. And from what I can tell, neither of them was ever caught again, and David is on the loose. What's more, the only known video or photographic material of David in about a decade or so is this one video, where his face is blurred, likely at the time to prevent someone from getting to him before he could be tried. Sitting here now, the blur is annoying because it's just another stumbling block in the story, but nonetheless, if we were to compare it to this over decade-old shot of David Flintstone to this arrest in 2025, in spite of the blur, the two have eerily similar builds. I dare say the exact same, factoring for the years. Their body language is extremely similar, and the face, from what we can tell of it, is, just about identical. And the only differences appear to be age, which makes sense considering the photos are, once again, taken some 15 years apart. And shout out to whoever blurred the faces, because he did obviously blur it, but it was just enough to please his boss, but also left us enough to see that, come on man, it's gotta be the same guy. It seems like we have traveled far from the distillery in Hawaii, so now I want to go all the way back there. Back to David Flintstone. We have seen his connections to Colombia, where he was arrested for trafficking and pedophilia, among other things, but there is more. And this is where we're going to have to discuss, of all things, Mr. Potato Head. I know it sounds crazy, but we're going to get there. David has two main social media profiles online that were connected when this all came out. The one is his Facebook, where he describes himself as the Grand Poobah and references his job as a distiller. Poobah is an obscure word, ironically originating from the cartoon The Flintstones, denoting someone of great influence and power, holding many offices. There's also some sort of reference to secret societies in there as well. This is one of several reasons why I think David Flintstone is a false name, but we don't have time to go down that path today. Just know that there's no real records of David Flintstone except for in relation to this story and the Colombia happenings. I apologize, I said I won't digressing. The Facebook profile is one thing as it has his name, but what researchers early on to that gave them pause is where else this term Poobah was used. And it was found on another Facebook profile for someone named Biff Skipman. Insofar as I can tell, that is a made-up name, which is not altogether strange for David since he has so many aliases. But beyond the fact that these two accounts use the same word, that being Poobah, we have other reason to know these two accounts belong to the same guy. Because someone hacked into David's email back in 2016 and confirmed that the emails for both accounts were each other's backup email in the Gmail application. Biff Skipman is also the pseudonym of the person behind the CheesyBay account, meaning David Stone had used that as a false identity behind his possible, dare I say probable, CP selling eBay site. And it's important to connect these two emails and these two profiles because what is said on the Biff Skipman profile is utterly bizarre. And it reads as follows. Biff Skipman. I'm a small potato-shaped man with luxurious facial hair, many fine hats, and a welcoming smile. Raised by boll weevils in the forest until age 9, I learned to speak at 12, then didn't shut up for 5 years. At 17, I was run over by a bus while bicycling, which left me in a coma for 10 years. I was roused from my coma by the angelic voices of the Salvation Army Pterodactyl Choir and felt compelled to leave all worldly goods behind. This lasted for the rest of the week until I found out about the substantial monetary settlement from the bus company. I purchased a boat and set sail for the horizon, certain that my luck would hold and eager to discover what fate held for me. I discovered that sailing experience is not a metaphor and crashed into the side of a barge, leaving the harbor. After abandoning ship, I swam to shore, was placed in protective custody, and spent the next 11 years arguing with an imaginary roommate about the importance of flossing. Upon my court-ordered release, I started up a used cheese business, which quickly grew to immense size through shrewd acquisition acquisitions, and explosive online growth. I became the largest provider of used cheese and cheese substitutes in the nation. This attracted attention from online interlopers, and it wasn't long before CheesyBay was shut down, the victim of a costly trademark battle and judicial incompetence. Presently, I reside in Hawaii, collecting recyclables and tending my candy wrapper garden. Favorite quotes, that's going to leave a bruise. Yeah, so that was a little weird. Boomer humor maybe referenced what he actually does, almost certainly with the other context we have. In 2016, we lived in a world where most people didn't know Jeffrey Epstein's name. Now we live in one where it's well known that food terminology is used to describe children and acts with them. I don't believe the story he tells, obviously, about the beginning with the bus and the coma and the crash and all that. It's satirical, but in a world where the internet is populated by hundreds of thousands and really millions of people looking for this sort of material, it would be ignorant to think that these sites don't exist, and in fact there is a lot of precedent for it. There are other examples of this sort of phenomena where eBay is used and hard drives are used under the guise of being broken or faulty to disseminate this sort of information. Unfortunately, if there is a market for it, someone is going to supply that market. The description of the Biff Skitman profile may read strangely, but it's not unlikely that's the point. Most people would think it's to be funny and move on. Those in the know, however, would see it as a flag for where to go from. And again, Biff Skitman is the name behind the CheesyBay eBay account, according to the 2016 researchers. And unfortunately, we live in a time where this is all going on all around us. And the hacked email for David Stone makes that much more obvious. We no longer have access to the original email and account material. It's been lost to time, and whoever accessed the email didn't want to stay for too long because they didn't want to get nabbed. So we have two main emails left from that era, which speak volumes. Here are the emails read in full. Hi David, I have been given your details by Richard Windsor in the hope that you would be able to supply us with a reference for him. Please could you complete and return to me as soon as possible. Many thanks, Anita. Oh my goodness, I hope you found a sleep partner by now. If not, you must be exhausted. If you're going to need another sleep partner anytime soon, please write back. I have attached a photo, though it is not quite up to date. I can send a more recent one if you like. By the way, are you giving the back rub? Dave. Notice what image is attached to these emails and makes it seem as though it's David Stone's signature, that being a Mr. Potato Head JPEG attached to the emails. This same Potato Head actually appears on David's personal website as well. Really creepy one. All it is a search bar and a picture of Mr. Potato Head. That's it. So the Potato Head is, for whatever reason, clearly his thing, and it shows up on the Biff Skitman profile as well. Digressing, the first email is written to someone bearing a name related to the booker Sasha Lord at Comet Ping Pong, which is one of the many links here into the main PizzaGate thread. The more compelling portion of the email, to me, however, is that which references Richard Windsor. It makes us all wonder what this reference is for, especially in the context of Comet Ping Pong. However, normally this would have been it for us, a curiosity, something to chew on, and no more. Fortunately for us, it had come out back then in 2016 in the Clinton email leak that the name Richard Windsor was actually a fake name and belonged to someone named Lisa P. Jackson, who was deep in the White House in DC circles, working with Clinton and other politicians. And this is another of the several tie-ins to the wider PizzaGate happenings, but that's not the object of this video. It does, however, require us to ask what they could possibly be talking about here, especially if we are supposed to believe that David Stone is just some random dude who owns a distillery in Hawaii. And even more curious when paralleled with his other bizarre emails and the use of a Mr. Potato Head. All in all, I know one thing is for certain though about all of this: I will never be able to look at Mr. Potato Head the same again. Now we have a very special privilege here today. I was able to find a pretty obscure archive from December 9th of 2016, and it's from a website known as One Angry Gamer, and it supposedly contains an interview with the self-same David Flintstone as the one accused of all these crimes. Knowing now that he has been arrested for trafficking and trying to rape a kid, it makes his claims almost disturbingly funny as he tries to write off what was said, and it's one of those things that doesn't age well with time because of all the new information that has been released. But I think it's worth going through some of it to see what he said and to give the other side of this whole story. This is from the One Angry Gamer site. It all started back in October of 2015, according to Flintstone, when he hired in someone named Michael, a consultant for distilleries. McSorley lived in an apartment near the distillery doing work for Flintstone. What's the significance of Michael? According to Flintstone, McSorley is the one who posted up the information about the distillery on the Black Ops subreddit and on the Top Secret forum. The information he posted insinuated that some kind of child trafficking ring may have been attached to the distillery. which then caught the attention of the citizen investigators from PizzaGate after hacked emails from David Flintstone's account allegedly show that he was in communication with a booker from Comet Ping Pong, a supposed place of interest in connection with the allegations surrounding John Podesta and Tony Podesta. What's really strange about this is that there is actually an audio interview from the One Angry Gamer's YouTube page that is linked on this website. However, going through all of the archives I could find online, I was able to find old archives of the article, but none of the actual video. And today the video has been privated, which is strange to me. Take that as you may. In the phone interview, I asked Flintstone about the photographs, the links, the allegations made in the Reddit and forum posts, and if any of that meant anything to him. And he stated, yeah, I recognize the photos. I recognize his feet. I recognize his flip-flops. Everything he says are things that, well, pause. Not everything he says. Extended pause. We discussed it since he worked here for several months. He acknowledged that McSorley was there between 6 or 7 months and was supposed to be helping set up Flintstone's distillery in Honolulu, Hawaii. However, as time passed by, Flintstone claims that McSorley began behaving oddly. I queried Flintstone about the Facebook connection and the eBay account that McSorley allegedly stated belonged to Flintstone, where he mentioned on the Reddit post that he thought something shady was going on regarding the CheesyBay eBay account, for which some individuals believed it may have been a front for a child. However, according to Flintstone, he doesn't own the CheesyBay email account, just another self-named account on eBay. So where did the connection between CheesyBay and Flintstone come from? Well, he doesn't know. That's convenient. I don't have a freaking clue. I'm pretty sure I showed McSorley my Biff Skipman Facebook. I show a lot of people because I think it's funny, frankly. Extended pause. And he's working here, so he's told me he has his own website and says, oh, I can help you with marketing or whatever. And I probably showed him at one point. We'll let him to make the connection between the Facebook and CheesyBay eBay accounts. I don't know. Insanity? So right off the bat, he's framing it as though this guy, I'm not going to include his full name, is insane. But just wait and see how this continues. Given that Flintstone was unsure of how McSorley made the connection between him and the CheesyBay eBay account, I did attempt to reach out to McSorley to ask him about the claims, but he hasn't responded as of the writing of this article. In fact, he supposedly hasn't been heard from since a few months ago, when he made claims on 4chan that he was being followed by government types and was on the run for his life. According to Flintstone, things started off okay, but then he states that McSorley started getting a little weird. He was perfectly normal. I hired him away from another distillery in Seattle. I went there to visit him to make sure he was what he said he was. I went to the distillery, talked to the owner there, verified his experience. This is because previously I had hired someone else who ended up being a drunk. Even though he had verifiable references, he ended up being an idiot. So I went to go see McSorley. I visited his house, met his girlfriend, everything checked out. Okay, so I hired him. He came out a month or two later, and I was very pleased with what we were doing, but very displeased with the continued delays on my building project, which had nothing to do with him or me. Anyway, we would do these little tests and everything was going just dandy until, I don't know, a little while before he disappeared, he started getting a little weird. Flintstone then insinuates that McSorley was dipping into something and he began to behave oddly and that his appearance began to change. According to Flintstone, he cites that the changes in behavior and appearance happened around the same time, saying his face started getting zit-like marks all over it out of nowhere, stereotypical tweaker kind of stuff. He started behaving erratically, he would leave stuff out and he would forget to do stuff. He started taking an air gun shooting roosters. Basically, from here on out, the entire David Stone interview is calling Michael a tweaker, an addict, and that he had a essentially schizophrenic breakdown to the point that he tore apart the apartment he was living in, and that Michael's dad came out and moved out his stuff because his son wouldn't come back. David says he tried to get in contact with Michael when the story first started growing online, but that he couldn't, and he also couldn't get in contact with his dad either. I kid you not, from what we can tell, this was a 54-minute interview. The majority of it seems to be him claiming that McSorley was a psychopath and had lost it, which doesn't really bode well now, considering the fact that we do know that David Flintstone is a pedophile and a trafficker based on the Medellin connection. But when not trying to cover his butt and claim that Michael was a tweaker, he actually does reveal some things. Like, for instance, this email did belong to him and that the concrete pad is there, the Wi-Fi signals are there, and a host of other things. He also admits that the weird email about the sleep partner is real. So all in all, the interview is worth reading for yourself, and I wish we had the original, but that seems to be pretty lost to time at this point. What I find pretty telling all these years later is that OP is the only one who ever gives photographic evidence for his claims. David Stone does not. And that's really strange considering some of the things he says, like he had equipment destroyed, or that he'd given Michael a truck to use, or especially you would have gotten evidence and would have been great proof to have here in telling your story of this destroyed apartment that you had Michael living in, because you would have needed that evidence for an insurance claim to cover the damages. Also, of all things to say when accused of what you're accused of, to say that you recognize the guy's toes is a little ironic. One of my favorite bits though is that he admits that OP had been up to everything OP claims to have been, like drilling into the concrete and searching around the property, and David even admits to owning the Biscuit Mint account, among other things like the Potato Head connection. And yet what I really want to point out is that we have no evidence that this was actually David Stone being interviewed. The website One Angry Gamer is not necessarily known for its rigor. If you look at the ads on their site from that era, you would know what I mean. So who this is, it could be David Stone or it could be someone completely different trying to play it up for the clout. In either case, it didn't quell my suspicions and only furthered them. It makes me want to know more about David and this Michael guy that he blames all these things on. And so I tried getting in contact with this person he claims was OP, and there was no response, not from OP or his dad referenced in David Stone's story. Furthermore, I went and researched into David Stone and I couldn't find any records of him ever having been in Hawaii or anything related to his family ever having been in Hawaii. So there's even a lack of records there. If I do get in contact with him, I'll let you guys know. But it doesn't seem like Michael P. Sorley may even have anything to do with this story at all. He might be completely unaware of this connection because the interview done with David Flintstone was obscure then and is still obscure now. I don't think it ever got more than 92 some odd views on YouTube in its time before being taken down. And once again, with this Columbia connection to David Flintstone going on, it seems that more and more whatever OP thought was going on at David Flintstone's quote-unquote distillery that day might very well have been real. And this CheesyBay connection could possibly be one of the most incriminating links in the entire PizzaGate realm. And so what to make of this and what to do about this is up to you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I can't wait to see each and every one of you in the next one.